Sleep Aid. Midday in Canterlot Castle. The halls abuzz with servants moving about their daily routines. Loud clattering of hooves and armor stomping along. Trays of food moving to and fro on the backs of the hand mares and stallions. And the talking, of course. The idle chit-chat of the day's goings. This is how things operate during Celestia's time of control. Active and happily, depending on whom you ask, carrying on their lives as the sun gives such a warm embrace, giving freely life-sustaining energy. However, this bustle and tussle was now a great deal more audible than usual, as if being amplified by hundredfold that continuously looped within her ears. Within the darkness of her room, with bloodshot eyes open to the ambient cacophony of the day's going, the Princess of the Night lay in her bed with her hooves over top of her blanket. She lay there, motionless in her awakened state, staring into the oblivion lower ceiling. She had tried a great many things to get to sleep, aids, flipping the pillow, even inviting a guard into her room to help her release some levels of stress. But alas, none of those things aided in her search for slumber. Perhaps a change in venue was in order. Leaving the busy castle to retire elsewhere may actually serve some greater good. Rising from her bed and donning the trappings of a regal visage, Luna exited her room into the grand hallways of her wing of the castle, her wing raising instinctively to shield her from the stubborn rays of the sun. She released a groan and hiss of annoyance, but understood it was a needed evil to make it to a new sleeping location. Making her way through the labyrinth that was the castle, the lunar goddess garnered quite a few odd looks and glances from anyone to whom crossed her path. "Sister, is that you?" a soothing and somewhat irritating voice called out. Turning her head, she saw the mother-like visage of her elder sister. The pristine white alicorn clad in golden horseshoes and collar around her neck, her eyes holding levels of grace and serene that made Luna rather more irritated than usual. "What are you doing awake at this time of day?" she asked lightly. Luna felt her face slump lightly.
"Apparently in a vexed state of sustained awareness,"
she said as her wing retracted to her back, righting her posture as best she could.
"What does the ruler of the sun desire of one such as us?"
she asked, raising her head and moving just past her. Celestia could only close her eyes and release a gentle breath before turning back to her sister. "Being unable to sleep means that you will not be able to completely keep up with your court or your duties," Celestia said, raising her voice to catch her sister's ear. "Perhaps a short retreat from the castle will do you some good," she mused, looking back to her sister. Luna's ear twitched as her gaze shifted over to her sister.
"And we presume that you have some inkling of a place to which we can travel?"
she asked. "That I do. And you will know it as well. The epicenter of chaos over the past year. Ponyville," Celestia said with a smile. A loud scoff came from the lunar goddess.
"You believe that such a place will be able to aid in my need for slumber? With the rise of the Princess of Friendship, her new student, the former bearers of the elements of harmony, and the central hub for the Lord of Chaos, how could we even begin to fathom how to attain blissful sleep within such a truly disastrous place?"
She had visited during Nightmare Night and during her own struggles with the Tantibus, so she knew of the propensity for disruption the small town incurred. She was met with the same smile that Celestia had been holding when she first saw her sister today, a smile of absolute knowing and clairvoyance. Call it a hunch or divine providence if you will, but it is only but a suggestion, one that you need not follow if you so desire. Celestia spoke as she turned her attention forward and began to walk. "Should you choose Ponyville, I will send word to my faithful student to make preparations for your arrival," she finished as the solar goddess went on about her day. Luna stood in the castle hallway, feeling a bit more vexed than before she had ran into her sister.
The very idea is lunacy incarnate. How could she believe that we would even think to go to such a place?
Luna trailed off. The thought played for a few moments within her mind as she thought about it longer. Maybe it wasn't such a harebrained idea.
Very well. Send word of our arrival.
Luna cried out before making her way down the halls. Celestia only smiled, her horn aglow with her telekinetic grip, while a parchment and quill hovered just before her. Luna paraded her way out the castle, much to the surprise of her personal envoy of bat ponies waiting for her. She gave them a rather curt nod, causing them to click their hooves together in unison before she boarded the carriage. No doubt, this was her sister's manipulation at work once more. Sitting upon the royal rump, the princess was airlifted out of the city of Catalan. The capital city seemed to just be as noise-stricken as the great halls of the castle. Grinding her teeth as she looked out the window, the midnight blue alicorn could only wonder as to what would happen to her in the catastrophe-ridden town known as Ponyville. She watched as the landscape below shifted from towering spires to the lush greens of expanding plains and rolling hills. The wind blowing the soft-looking grass causing it to wave with unspoken luster and gleam. Maybe this wasn't such a bad idea after all. It sure beat just idly sitting in the castle, trying to obtain sleep. The flight itself was uneventful and rather slow, probably due to weather conditions or perhaps her guards taking their time to enjoy the world around them. Either way, it actually did wonders to help her relax. Maybe she could just sleep in the carriage and not bother with the whole going somewhere thing. However, before those thoughts could fully manifest, they were touching down just in front of the impressive and monumental Castle of Friendship. Sighing that her ride and thoughts were cut too swiftly for her liking, Luna exited her station in the carriage and looked to her guard. They seemed to obey her silent command and took to the skies once more, heading back to Catalog to heed her next call. Approaching the massive archway, she began a small series of raps against the door. Surely, with her new status as princess, Twilight Sparkle must have invested in a few dozen servants in order to help run this massive structure. When no pony answered her call, she rapped once more against the heavy object. This time, it budged and began to open. Standing now at her height, and in a bipedal fashion, was a dragon who was often associated with Twilight. Spike the dragon was now well within the thralls of his second growth cycles. An adolescent in dragon senses, but more of a young adult within the pony world. Much like other dragons, he seemed to grow taller and much more predator-like. His once pudgy belly giving way to a sleek stature and hardened scales. His rather bright lime green eyes looked the princess back into her own. "I've been expecting you," Spike said, smiling at the princess with a wide grin.
Surely our sister must have sent word to you,
she said in a rather cool fashion.
Tell me, young Drake, where is your retainer?
Luna asked as she was allowed into the massive structure. Twilight? I believe she and Starlight went to the Crystal Empire to talk with Cadence in shining armor. Beats me as to what though, he said with a shrug as he closed the door. The sound of Luna's hooves moving along the pristine floor seemed to echo quite a bit.
Tell us, where are the other servants? Surely she has invested in a few by now.
Luna inquired as she soon found her host walking alongside of her. Spike only shrugged once more. Just me, and I would prefer not to be called a servant, he said with a rather flat tone. Luna looked at the Drake and then lowered her head.
Apologies, Spike. We are most tired and have found sleep to be eluding at best, and a vile temptress at worst,
she said with a small taste of bitterness in her tone. Spike could only place a claw to his chin and think about it. Looking outside, it was still a good ways into the early afternoon, and if the princess needs some sleep before she had her nightly duties, then he needed to figure out a solution. Snapping his fingers, he got an idea. "What have you tried so far?" he asked, looking to her. The princess breathed loudly as she thought on it.
We have tried a great many things. Aids of honey and tea, flipping the pillows to its cool side, even laying with a guard who only lasted but mere seconds before us, she groaned. This caused a bit of laughter to come from the dragon.
I gotcha. You're probably tense. I can tell just by how you walk, he said almost knowingly. His tone almost gave the princess pause, but she continued on with him through the various passageways of the castle.
And pretty, how have you gained such an inkling as to the distress of the crown?
She asked again. Again, the drake only chuckled. Seriously? You're up all night, sleep during the day, you spend most of your time sitting on a throne or roaming dreams, not to mention having to oversee the rising and setting of the moon. If I had to guess, you probably have pain in your wing joints and lower back. Spike hypothesized loud enough for Luna to hear. Having just now heard him say it seemed to trigger whatever was blocking the dull feeling of pain that was in her lower back and wings. When had those been sources of discomfort?
Quite the observation, but not easily remedied. One must understand that alicorn anatomy varies a deal from other types of pony,
she said as a door opened before her. Which is why you're in my part of the castle, Spike said with a nod. Luna looked before her. The halls were now dark and almost blotted out with blackout curtains that suppressed the sun's light. Stilling her tongue for a few moments, the two walked in silence to a room where candles were lit and gently flickering. A table sat in the middle of the room as the air smelled of the most fragrant of flowers.
What is this?
She asked, looking to the dragon, who now was bathed in the soft glow of light. She could only wonder what was about to transpire. It's going to help you relax. Now get up on the table and I can get started, he said, walking over to the wall. Rather hesitantly, Luna obeyed his request and sat herself on the table. On one side of the table was a small hole for her muzzle and face to sit in, and on the other side were what looked like fresh towels. As she looked back up to her current caretaker, Spike had placed such a towel around his neck and brought over a rather large box of objects. Fearing the worst, Luna's horn began to charge with magic as her wings snapped out.
Foul creature, what dost thou plan to do to us?
She boomed commandingly. Spike, surprisingly unfazed, simply set the box down and pulled out a few stones, lotions, and oils. It's called massage. Chill. He deadpanned once more. She wasn't sure which was more amazing, the fact that this dragon just withstood her royal voice without so much as batting an eye, or that he was actually going to pamper her a little. The magic soon dissipated and her wings fluttered shut as she tried to compose herself.
We are most sorry,
she said rather meekly. Looking up to the dragon, she saw that he only had an understanding smile on his face. Don't worry about it. Hooves, please, he requested. Luna snapped to his request rather quickly and extended her hooves outward. She felt his claws take hold of each of her hooves, one at a time, slowly removing her horseshoes from them and setting them down near the table. Pulling her hooves in, she watched him walk around her and rather smoothly lifted the collar from her neck and set it on a hook. Lastly, he took the ebony crown from atop her head and placed it on a spot by the stones. Speaking of the stones, Spike took hold of at least 4 of them and blew his flames at them, superheating the pieces of earth and setting them off to the side to cool for a few moments. When he returned to Luna, she had apparently tucked her hooves in close to her body and was patiently awaiting what he was going to do next. Alright, I need you to lay flat on your belly for me, he said with a soft and caring tone. Luna's gaze shifted from him to a spot on the floor for a moment before adjusting to meet his request. All of her lips were still rather tucked in close to her body, but at least she was now flat. With the princess now in position, the young drake popped the top of one of the lotions. Smearing it into his claws, he began to rub the generous amount of solution into and between his claws before he approached her, effectively warming the cool liquid. This may feel a little weird, he said before his claws made contact. The princess released a very undignified yelp as the sensation of his fingers pressed into the middle of her back. There was something about the digits pressing into several spots at once that just seemed to cause this intense reaction. But it was by no means a bad one. In fact, it was rather stimulating. She barely had the time to adjust when she felt those digits begin to move along her back. Working in relative silence, the dragon stroked and pressed the creamy substance into her fur a little at a time with each pass of her back. He focused mainly on her mid-back, going up the length of her spine and pressing with some levels of firmness before dragging his claws back down her back. This too seemed to elicit low, throaty moans from the princess of the night.
How did you learn such tricks?
She asked between unashamed moans. Spike only smiled a little as he removed his claws, much to her dismay. Resupplying on the lotion, he spoke. Well, when you try to impress someone you have a major crush on, you want to learn everything and anything that can please them. So I asked the spa ponies Hello and Lotus to teach me how to be a massage therapist. Said I had a natural knack for it because I have fingers and get all the sweet spots that ponies normally can't get at. He explained as his hands landed once more on her back. Luna could feel whatever tension that had mounted there melt away into a cool pool of total relaxation. Her moans began to fill the air again as the dragon worked his way up her back and slowly began to touch the base of her wings. With a squeal, her wings fanned out in a stiffened state, outstretched and painfully erect. The wings twitched every so often as Spike observed them. This didn't cause him to falter as he worked on one wing at a time. It was easier in the long run this way. For both wings, he would start at the base and hold it steady as his fingers worked the muscles and hollow bones just enough to ease the tension and pressure. Luna's moans shifting into much louder cries of ecstasy, as she had never felt such treatment before. There was a thick blush upon her muzzle, her eyes half-lidded and damn near glazed over from pleasure. Her loud pants only stopped as they became more frequent once his fingers went the entire breadth of her wing.
By the stars! Ah!
She squealed as he went back down her wing and focused on the point between the two. Taking his thumb, he gently, or as gently as he could, kneaded the tired muscles. This was all very new, and if she were to be honest, it was too much. With another firm press into that joint, her head reared back, and she let loose a pleasure-filled scream as her body quivered with absolute bliss. Spike rather swiftly stopped what he was doing, and though he knew better, looked back to Luna's nether regions. Sure enough, the mare's tail was lifted, her puffy slit seeping her own brand of nectar all over the table while her clit winked invitingly to anyone who could see it. He looked back to Luna, who was now panting rather feverishly after all that had happened. Sorry about that? Spike tried with a rather sheepish look about him. Luna slowly turned her head, her mouth slightly agape as she panted. She didn't look angry or agitated, more like she had just reached a peak that none had brought her to before.
We request that you continue, Sir Spike. Thy skills are, stimulating.
She commented as her head turned back around and eagerly awaited his continued ministration. Spike held a rather flustered look as he eyed her. She was twitching slightly and her wings lay lazily limp along the sides of the table. Spike's eyes darted back to her exposed marehood again before gulping down a pocket of air in his throat. Taking more of the lotion, he had to wonder just how the rest of this massage was going to go. He still had to work over her lower back and flanks. With the same fluid motions of warming the lotion, he hesitantly reached out and pressed into her lower back. This caused the princess to squeal a bit softer than before as her whole body was still a tingle from her climax. Working in rather stress-filled silence, the drake ran his claws along her lower back, pressing into her much like he had been before. But now he was much more aware of how she may or may not react. The only thing that was for sure was that her constant fidgeting was making it a bit difficult. On his next press, he held her down into place, causing the princess to moan in submission. Apparently, Spike was really good at finding all the right buttons. Luna slowly began to pant a little faster as those blessed fingers worked her over like a finely tuned instrument. This feeling, this pleasure, it was so intense and demanding of her to just let it all go. Her eyes widened, and she yelped when those digits took hold of her flank and began stroking. Her flank and rump may not have been as big as her sister's, but to say she was a decent handful would be an insult. Spike was finding it harder and harder to fully concentrate as the blood in his body began to travel elsewhere.
Tell us, did thou woo the mare they acquired these skills for?
She asked. That seemed to take quite a bit of the wind out of Spike's sails as he felt a flicker of sadness wash over him for a moment. Thankfully, it allowed him to focus more on the task at hand. No, actually. She actually fell in love while on a business trip to Manhattan. I wished her all the best and have since tried to move on, though it does sting a bit. He said as he slowly began to stop. Luna looked back at him, his claws still holding her supple yet firm flanks as he looked down. It's just... trying to make ponies notice all the things you do for them and not really getting the recognition you want. It kinda hurts, he said, before taking a breath to clear his head. Raising his eyes to meet her gaze, Spike was suddenly aware of the look of longing in Luna's eye. Through the faint light of the room, her eyes seemed to shimmer more so than the stars at night.
I have also known such things of neglect. Though the scales may not be the same, the pain is very much the same, Sir Spike,
she said as she rose up on rather wobbly hooves and turned towards him. Placing a hoof to his cheek, she drew his attention to her face. A soft smile greeted Drake as she seemed to understand.
Take heart. We are alike, and you will always have that, she said sweetly.
Spike was still far more concentrated on her eyes before blinking and coming back to reality.
Now then, thy claws have grown quite idle. Mayhaps thou shalt continue with thy works?
She asked as she turned around and all but stuck her flank into his face. Giving it a little enticing wiggle, she smiled rather playfully back at the dragon, who was staring wide-eyed at her flank. Right, he said, while doing his best to contain himself. Clearing his throat, he began the process anew with the same cycle of warming the lotion and then applying it. He took a deep breath and grabbed hold of her flanks, causing the princess to moan in delight. The sheer excitement she was feeling from having his digits caress and knead her flanks only made her already moistened flower quiver more so. With slow presses and gentle racks of his claws, Spike worked the lotion in and began massaging her rump. He had to admit that it was a thing of wonder to literally be holding a goddess's flanks and causing her such pleasure in the process. Thinking on it, he knew there was something else he could do for her. Something rather naughty, but with the way she was responding, maybe she would go for it. "Princess?" he called out to her as he continued working her flanks with his claws. He got a moan in response and saw her head lift to look back at him. Would you like a happy ending?" he asked, a little on the sheepish side. Luna really didn't look confused, but more so enraptured in pleasure. She didn't know what the term meant, but if it were to continue her pleasure, then why not?
"Proceed,"
she said between pants and moans. He honestly hadn't thought she would go for it so quickly. Maybe it was just the maturing libido of the dragon to even ask, but at the end of it all, she agreed to it. With a nod, Spike took a deep breath and continued working as he normally had. Luna's mouth hung rather lazily open as his claws did things to her flank that no guard or stallion could ever hope to do. But with such movements and actions, she did feel her flanks being spread every so often. The feeling of her nethers being exposed to the youth was both embarrassing and exciting at the same time. She knew exactly how swiftly young drakes matured, and if they were anything comparable to stallions, then she knew he was looking. It's not every day any pony or any dragon gets to lay claws or hooves upon a goddess. With each spread of her rump, she felt a wash of pleasure rocket through her body and caused her to let out a soft squeak in response. With her slit now directly in front of him, the dragon leaned in, his eyes constantly looking back to Luna's muzzle for any sign of backing out. When it never came, he allowed his tongue to loll from his maw and drag from her clit all the way to her puckered star nestled in the middle of her cheeks. The reaction was immediate. Her wings regained whatever life they had and flapped open, stiff and rigid. Looking back, she saw his eyes close as that forked tongue finished his long, drawn lap from point to point. Her body made no sign of hesitation, instead her hind legs pushing herself back to better give the dragon access to her. He was thankful for her willingness at this point, his tests of her response proving very positive. With the formality of the test lick out of the way, he went to work. He didn't bury his maw into her and flap his tongue like an unindoctrinated colt on his first go at a mare. He proceeded with skill and tact. This was a mare, not some piece of fruit to be lapped at and eaten in an instant. No, he savored her taste. His tongue started at her winking clit once more, slow and drawn out laps from clit to star to simply get a feel for how she liked it. Every quiver, every flinch gave him a new piece of information to better suit her needs, and she was not shy on her quivering. After the first lap had ran its course, the princess had fully surrendered all control to the dragon. She was now his treat to eat up however he wished, though one thought did register low in the back of her mind through the lusting fog that now dominated her.
I taste good?
She asked. She saw the predator's eyes open. This half-lidded stare of desire looked back at her with so much fire that she swore she would be set ablaze. A very fine blueberry wine that was aged to perfection, he commented before his eyes closed and he focused again. This time, however, he knew what he licked. She was a naughty mare from what he could gather. With a smile, he flicked his tongue against her slightly pulsing star. It craved his attention, and who was he to deny it? Luna released a shrill squeal of delight as he felt his tongue press and swirl around her star, getting a good taste of her essence in the process. But just as she was reaching a slight peak, she could feel the attention dwindle to a crawl. Whimpering loudly, she wanted to look back and berate him for stopping, but her head soon crashed into the table as his tongue spread out her lips. It was not something done often enough for her liking. A stallion could only do so much with his shaft and hooves to properly stimulate unless they were instructed to. That was not the case here. Spike knew what she wanted, and he seemed to know just how she liked it. The long, draconic tongue shot into her tunnel without a great deal of warning. Moaning out, she pressed her flank into his face and proceeded to grind his muzzle. She was desperate to get every bit of that glorious appendage into her as quickly as possible. Spike let out a slight muffled yelp before he continued, his tongue wriggling and thrashing about within her most guarded of troves, with no remorse for how she felt. Her panting only increased when she felt those blessed hands cupping and massaging her flanks again as he worked. The boy was a treasure.
By the stars!
She cried out as she tried to hold on to anything for dear life. Pressure was building within her loins, so much faster than with any other, and with intensity to match.
I'm gonna...
She cried. That was the signal. Pulling his tongue from her depths, the dragon quickly enclosed her clit within his lips. suckling and flicking the throbbing nub as if it were a precious gem to be eaten. Luna's eyes widened, her jaw almost unhinged, and her body felt like it was about to explode. With a high-pitched scream, she achieved her peak. Her climax was intense to say the least. There was no stopping and no hindering the flow of nectar that flowed freely from her generous flower into the maw of the dragon. He was not one to deny this gift from the heavens, hungrily lapping up her bounty. When she finally ceased the flood of her sweet essence, the dragon gave her a slit, a soft couple of licks before ending it with an affectionate kiss to her clit. Licking his lips, he finally allowed himself to peer past the royal rump. Hope I did alright. I haven't had a lot of practice. He stopped his sentence when he saw that she was sound asleep with the most absolutely pleased smile on her face. Spike only smiled lightly as he scooped her up into his arms and blew out the candles before leaving the room in the dark. Adjusting her in his arms, he carried her into his room and laid her onto the bed. With a soft smile, the drake gently ran his claw through her mane before leaving her to rest. During our much-needed time of rest, the world carried on its usual routine. Vendors selling their wares, the solar goddess approving and disapproving certain projects or decrees. Then, there was the dragon inside the Castle of Friendship. Spike worked alone to maintain the castle. His days mainly comprised of scrubbing floors, cleaning the map room, doing dishes, preparing meals, and the occasional library maintenance. But unlike most times, he was home alone. Twilight was not there to have messed anything up, and the halls were still pristine and clean. Dishes taken care of, all the waste gotten rid of, and nothing much left to do but sit back and relax. With Luna asleep in his room, he didn't really have any other place to sit down and relax. "Wait a sec," he said aloud to himself as he finished putting away the items from the message. Closing the door and walking the halls for a few moments, he found one of his favorite hiding holes. Since there were so many rooms upon rooms in the castle, it usually paid off to have one or two rooms to gather one's thoughts. This one in particular housed a grand piano hoof-crafted from the oldest of trees within the ever-free forest. With a satisfied smile, the drake looked to the other side of the doorway and grabbed up his suit jacket. For some reason, wearing that jacket while he played always gave him that Beethoven feel. Speaking of the illustrious composer, Spike had his work sitting upon the piano's music desk. Sitting down at the bench, he thumbed through the piece and found where he had left off. Funny enough, with the present company, it was Moonlit Sonata. With a smile and a slight shake of his head, he decided to start the piece from the beginning, with only the walls and windows to bear witness. He began to play. Deep within the dream world of Luna's own creation, the princess could feel that her body was truly at peace. Her stresses but footnotes in the annals of her life. She walked quietly through the mist-covered banks of a far-off coast. The moon was full, the air crisp in the wake of the night sky, and the sweet sound of piano playing.
Wait, piano?
She asked. Looking around for a few moments, she realized that she was within her own dream. With a smile, she knew she could manipulate it how she pleased, but the music was foreign.
Perhaps Sir Spike invited a musician over to help soothe my slumber. A kind gesture, but hardly a necessity after his skills.
She purred and shivered as the lingering tingles within her loins seemed to come back in faint whispers. With a tap of her hoof and her horn aglow, the dream ended swiftly. As her eyes flared open within the room she was placed in, she saw the silver light of the moon flooding the room from the open window. How long had she slept? For if the day had already come to a close and the moon had risen. Clearly, Celestia had had a hoof in raising the moon, but there were much more pressing matters to tend to. The source of the music, for one. Though in her dream she could hear Beethoven, she now heard Bach. Exiting the room, she followed the echoing sounds of the notes. One door along her way was cracked open and gave off a soft glow from the inside. pushing the door open with her still bare hoof. She looked in to see Spike playing his heart out on the keys. Her eyes transfixed, her body slowly moving towards him like a zombie, her ears a constant twitch as she stood behind him.
How?
She asked, laying a hoof on his shoulder. His playing began to slow as he looked back at her. He was about to ask her what she was talking about when she spoke again.
How could some dragon with such vast skill not capture the heart of a mare he sought? Pianist skills, massages, managing a massive structure, even the true dragon lord, if it were not for thy benevolence. Why would a mule even remotely decline such a catch?
She asked rather madly. She does not like dragons in the romantic sense, Spike said with zero hesitation.
A mule by any other name still reeks of shit!
Luna bellowed in her canterlot whine. Spike once again weathered the storm and simply straightened out his jacket as Luna panted heavily from the boom of her voice. Clearing her throat, she tried to seem at the least bit in control of herself, though that was getting increasingly harder and harder to do. To say smitten was an understatement and love-struck was an overstatement. What now paraded her thoughts may have just been unadulterated lust, the prospect of more mind-crippling climaxes and peaks itching at her marehood and causing her to seep copious amounts of her nectar. Spike soon felt the princess's gaze all over him. From his claws to his muzzle, his tail to his eyes. His voice hitched in his throat as she pressed herself into him and kissed him. His back crashed into the keys as Luna thrust the full weight of her body into him. She had reached her limits sexually. Long nights prior and 1,000 years sentence in isolation had driven the mare sexually starved. And though the occasional guard was fun for a quick fix, there was no force in the stars or on the planet that was going to come close to what she desired of the Drake. The kiss was hot, wild, unrefined, and unrestricted. Luna's much broader tongue invading the dragon's maw, regardless of the jagged and sharp fangs that lay within. Finally catching up to what was happening, the dragon could reason that he should stop her, stop the princess from making a mistake that would bother her for the rest of their friendship. Or he could simply indulge himself in sins of the flesh and bed a goddess. Being a youth in his prime, and being given almost no other option, he reasoned, when in Rome. Pressing back, he grabbed hold of her cheek and neck and battled back, his tongue forcing hers to a neutral zone where their mouths had crashed together. Now was no longer the time for teasing or romantics. Foreplay was over. Lifting the mare by her flanks, the dragon hoisted her up and began to carry her. Luna dared not break the kiss lest some of the passion escape it. Her front hooves wrapped around his neck as their feverish session spilled into the hallways and into his room. Throwing Luna to his bed, Spike was on top of her quick enough, his instincts for mating having kicked in from within. He loomed over her, his claws constantly in contact with the mare of the stars below him. He ran his claws up and down her barrel, to her hips and flanks, and back again. Luna was now more of a quivering mess in her loins than during the massage.
Take me now, you beast. Rut me like a common horse, she breathed and moaned as she broke the kiss.
That was quite the request for the young dragon, but he believed he could manage. Just so we're clear, and you know what you're getting into, he commented as he backed off of the squirming mare. In the dull moonlight, she saw the pink spire extend just between her teats. The thickened dragon pride stood the same length of a stallion, maybe a hair's breadth shorter. Its selling point were twofold. The first was its form, rather thicker than your run-of-the-mill stallion, and equipped with deep ridges along its underside that lead to a tapered spearhead. The whole shaft was glistening in some sort of self-made lubricant that gave it its luster. The second selling point was a knot that formed just at its base, clearly to be used for locking mates in place to not escape impregnation. After seeing that Goliath that would no doubt be plundering her deepest reaches, the princess could only salivate at the prospect.
I did not stutter. Rub me like a wench. Ruin this goddess's fruit for all who may try to taste it from it after you.
She moaned, mewling loudly and wriggling as much as she could with the dragon between her hind legs. She wanted to edge him onto the point of almost savage lovemaking. Having heard this from one of the waitstaff, she decided to take a page from the mayor's book.
Fuck me like a bitch in heat,
she cried out. Taken a bit aback by her use of crass language, Spike looked down at her rather wide-eyed. But it did the trick. He was on her again. That draconic maw now wrapped around her neck and giving her loving bites that would not cause her to bleed but would leave a mark on her fur. Taking one of his claws, he aimed the spear to her lower lips and pressed. The sensation of a spear was a new one for the princess. Usually the flat head of a stallion was more of an intrusion and abrupt, but this, it was gradual, spreading her core open with every inch that pushed its way in. Its natural upward curve complemented her canal so perfectly that she could literally feel the tip peeking into her womb. Luna's face went through several phases as he penetrated her. At first it was a bit underwhelming considering that it was just a small intruder, but as her lips spread to accommodate, the floodgates quickly opened. Her muzzle contorted into a firm grit before her mouth hung open as she moaned out with no restraints. That amazing full feeling was so intense, and the best part of it all was that he had not fully entered her. The knot sat firmly at her entrance, waiting to be plunged in and secure her. But it was not yet time. Instead, the dragon began to pull out. To her dismay, her core tried desperately to keep him within her. That empty feeling crawling back into her body at an alarming rate. She had to make him give it back to her.
I said fuck me,
she demanded. And by the stars did she get her wish. Not only did he thrust back into her, but he did so with such speed and power that it rendered her mute. Her wings flared out but soon relaxed and lay limp. The hard collision of his hips to her rump echoed through the room. Her eyes opened wide as now the knot had been forced in, his spear now in her womb. She tried to form a thought, tried to make some statement, but it all died in her throat as the dragon above her became relentless. Over and over again he would pull his hips back, pulling his knot and part of his shaft free of her only to ram it right back in. Lost was the pianist, lost was the massager, lost was the helpless youth. There was only the dragon, and the dragon wanted to be sated. Getting some manner of her wits about her, Luna looked at the dragon above her. He was staring right back at her. Every thrust, every pump, every spine-tingling plunge, his gaze was locked on her eyes. Watching her mouth work wordlessly, watching her eyes roll to the back of her head as pleasure overloaded her brain. "This is what you wanted, right?" he asked. Luna's eyes refocused on the moving maw before her, trying to keep up with what the now silken baritone was saying. "You wanted me to fuck you like a common horse. How do I measure up?" He growled with layers of cockiness dripping from his words. To emphasize, he rammed into her and began turning his hips to swirl his engorged glands within her to prolong her release. Luna could barely speak, her attempts more like high-pitched screams with each thrust.
Yes,
she screamed finally.
The bar has been broken, there is no other.
She cried as her front hooves wrapped around him to try and steady him. With a smile, he only seemed to ramp it up. It was an impossibility that he could go faster than he had been. To force her to peaks multiple times over the course of his session was something she believed only happened in the tomes of erotica. But now she was living it. And the greatest peak was soon to arrive.
It's coming.
She began to moan over and over. Soon her core was flooded with a sudden rush of heat. Had he blown before her? No. There was no sloshing within her, no feeling of ejaculate pouring into her. It was him. He was too close. Soon her rambling quickened, her words pouring from her mouth like a water down a fall.
It's coming, it's coming, it's coming!
She screamed as loud as she could. On a final thrust, she felt the beastly knot once more wedge itself into position, and his action stopped. Looking up at him, she saw a soft spark of gentleness in his eyes. "Kiss me," he requested. Eagerly, she obliged and crashed her lips to his. This was the trigger. Her core was overrun by dragon seed. It came in great bursts that deposited straight into her waking womb and flooded her canal. It would have escaped not for the knot blocking the only exit, but with nowhere to go, it overfilled her womb to the point of a near bulge. Luna screamed into the kiss as her walls clamped down on the dragon within her and milked him for all he was worth. She refused to waste a single drop of the dragon's bounty. She whimpered, her soft squeaks of pleasure only growing louder and louder as the dragon slowly began to pull himself free of her.
No, leave in. I want it in,
she cried gently. Spike looked down at her as she looked at him with a clear desire to stay connected. How could he refuse her? Rolling them slightly, he got it so that she lay atop him, and his slowly shrinking glands would naturally come out at their own pace. Luna smiled rather contentedly as she lay upon the dragon's chest, her wings slowly retracting onto her back.
That was most relaxing, Sir Spike,
she praised gently.
Never have we had such amazing company,
she said between taking in healthy amounts of air. You're the amazing one here, he said gently, looking up to her. Their eyes met for a few moments before they shared a rather tender kiss, his claw and her hoof stroking the other's cheek. When they slowly began to fade into the gentle embrace of each other in sleep, Luna spoke up once more.
Mayhaps when I need another day of rest, you will come to my aid?
She asked as she nestled her head into the crux of his neck. The drake only smiled softly as his arms wrapped around her. Anytime you need it, I got a spot for you right here, he said, stroking her back gently. If the two lovers had been aware, a tint adorned the moonlight that flooded the room and all of Equestria, a dull green light shining from the moon in a cloudless sky. Thank you all so much for listening. But this one seems a lot more calm than usual. Normally it's like, hello, thank you so much for listening. Now it's like, now we're calm. Now we're taking some ASMR lessons, aren't we? Well, I really hope you guys enjoy that. And I really hope that you guys are having a wonderful December. I don't know when exactly I'll be posting this one. I know that I'll have around 4 videos or so that will be coming out for Christmas, but I don't know exactly what order I'll be doing them. So if I'm posting this one on Christmas, because it's Christmas, then Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful time with your family or your friends if you don't have your family with you. I hope you go out and get yourself something really nice. Celebrate that it's the end of the year, or it's near the end of the year. And I always think there's a bit of melancholy that we all feel at the end of the year, don't we? When we look back and we just think about all we've done, all we've accomplished in the year, or maybe we haven't done anything special. And in that case, then we always plan ahead. We always think, well, what's the phrase? The grass is always greener on the other side. Yeah, well, there's always that positive elevation feeling. Oh, what am I even fucking talking? What am I even fucking doing? God, Jesus. Merry Christmas if I post this on Christmas. If not, I hope you enjoy the video. We've almost crested 50-minute mark. Oh my god, come on, crest that 50 minutes so I can end this. Oh my god, I hope you're doing okay. Yeah. Other than Christmas, I hope your Thanksgiving, if you celebrate it, happy Hanukkah, happy, I don't know, man, it's just like happy holidays, yeah, happy holidays. Shit. I mean, fuck. I don't know what to say. The story was all right, I guess. I mean, it wasn't. It's well done, but I had to correct a lot of fucking mistakes. Like, I don't know what is the author seems to just barely grasp some aspects of grammar. Like you know, like words can sound the same, but they aren't the same. You know, it's weird. But anyway, I think the story's pretty good. I really hope you enjoyed it, and until next time,
Bye bye.